Before we start, I'd like to acknowledge our sponsors, Air Traffic and Navigation Services, Airbus, Airports Company South Africa, the Agency for Aerial Navigation Safety in Africa and Madagascar, Boeing, Flight Safety Foundation, Kenya Airways, Petro SA, SAATM Convention Bureau, SGA Angola, South African Airways, South African National Space Agency, the South African Civil Aviation Authority, South African Tourism, Turkish Airlines, and Vivo Energy for making this week possible. Might we welcome them and honor them with a round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much. And speaking of the program, I'm going to waste no time and getting us straight into gear. Our very first session this morning is our opening plenary. It is titled Executive Punchline, and it isn't just a session for hedging and diplomatic vagueness. Neither is it for generic hints. The session is a session where leaders are going to speak explicitly about the opportunities and the challenges that are facing the aviation industry and extrapolate on some of the opening remarks that we have already had and spoken to earlier this morning. The title of this particular punchline is Resilient Growth in a Fragmented Aviation Landscape, and it addresses the uncomfortable truths of global uncertainty, of geopolitical risks, of regulatory divergence, infrastructure gaps, to mention but a few, and answering this pertinent question of, can Africa seize the moment to earnestly become the next frontier for African growth? We do have outstanding panelists to engage in this panel discussion. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to call upon our moderator for this panel, Mr. Vijay Punusamy, who is the Denton's Africa Aviation Lead and Partner, as well as the Veiling Group Board Member, who will do the honor of introducing his panelists. Might we honor him with a round of applause? Thank you so much.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Let me first ask you to join me to warmly welcome our distinguished panelists, Aaron Munetsi, the CEO of Airlines Association of Southern Africa. Aaron. George Motema, the CEO of Board of Airline Representatives of South Africa, and Brian Orret, Chief Quality Assurance Officer at South African Tourism. Well, welcome. Welcome all of you to this executive punchline, resilient growth in a fragmented aviation landscape, or literally, how to use an oxymoron to focus our attention and frame this Aviation Stakeholders Convention. The world, ladies and gentlemen, and therefore the global aviation industry, is experiencing compounded and sustained severe turbulence. The turbulence is even worse on our continent because of our chronic deficiencies. Air connectivity across our continent remains limited. Airfares remain among the highest globally, and many African airlines continue to operate within restrictive intra-African bilateral frameworks and uneven regulatory environments. African aviation clearly has huge potential. Africa accounts for nearly 20% of the world's population, but represents a mere 2.9% of global air traffic. That potential is amplified by the fact that Africa is transitioning from resource exporter to global agricultural powerhouse and central hub for investment, fintech, and renewable energy. Africa has the youngest population in the world, and the African Continental Free Trade Area has the potential to become the world's largest free trade zone by participating countries. Let me therefore ask you, ladies and gentlemen, to reflect on what three decisive actions must be taken by whom to position Africa as the next frontier for aviation growth and enable our continent to take off. And whilst you do so, I will ask our distinguished panelists to each take no more than 3 minutes to please tell us what three decisive actions must be taken, not why, but by whom, to position Africa as the next frontier for aviation growth and enable our continent to take off. George.
No, thank you, PJ. I think the first one that I think one would have to look at in order to position Africa to be sustainable is the geopolitical issue, number one, in terms of what's happening in the Gulf, highly centralized fossil fuel supply chain, is indicative of the fact that we probably need to do something different as Africans from a security of supply point of view. We've got about 5 top, oil-producing countries in Africa, and I think it's for those governments, if you look at Nigeria, Libya, Angola, as well as the other 2, there must be a system that creates an ability for Africans to be able to produce and create refineries that will be able to supply Africans. That's number one. And that should be done by our own government. Secondly, Kamal spoke about it, just in terms of the infrastructure tariffs that we're currently paying. I believe most of these entities, your airspace management, airport companies, and so on, is not owned by government. And this high tariff requires that government need to step in order to help our airlines to be sustainable. That's number 2. Number 3, I can get to 5, but let me do the last one. Number 3, I think AFRAA has taken a lead. We just came from Addis, I think about a month ago, with the introduction of the MRO, collaboration of the 4 biggest airlines in Africa. I think from a supply chain point of view, we need those type of arrangement, because they would give us an ability from an economies of scale for airlines themselves to be able to benefit out of the ability to buy certain things together and be able to exchange knowledge and technical know-how. Those are some of the things that I believe from an airline point of view, we should, as African airlines, find a way to build each other. We know these rules of competition, but you can play within the rules of competition law.
Thank you very much, George. Brian?
Thank you very much, Vijay. So I'm going to speak more from a destination perspective and a tourism perspective. There are 3 big things. We speak about them almost glibly, but they are so important to executing on the mandate. And I think we're at the point of executing the mandate. I think we've got our marching orders in the opening this morning. It is time to do, and this generation has to execute to make Africa a more connected continent, essentially. So I'm going to speak about collaboration. Collaboration is something that requires a concerted, intentional effort. As South African tourism, we put on Africa's Travel Indaba, which happened last week, and it was the 3rd year that we had hosted an airline pavilion. And that required a lot of collaboration from the industry to bring aviation into tourism. And it is something that we do not take lightly, and it's something that requires continuous work and improvement. Through collaboration, we see intentional action, and we've seen now that we have recovered our African route networks here. However, there's a lot more opportunity to grow. So collaboration is my first point. Coordination. Coordination is more about the more doing action. So for South Africa, we've seen the enhancement of visa regimes. We are seeing the activity of tourism. And I think through working with the aviation industry, we're going to see that high level of coordination result in success. And it really has to be an orchestration of efforts to make things work. The third component, which I find the rest of the world much better at than ourselves, is communication. So as Africans, we don't sometimes communicate our success as well as the rest of the world. And I think it's important because the communication is the energy we require to get energy from the rest of the world. And I think the communication of our success, the communication of our needs and our wants to make this successful are key, which is why platforms such as this are critical to the way that we progress the aviation industry. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Brian. Aaron.
So I'm just looking at the room and I'm thinking, these lights are too bright, man. I can't see everybody here. Who's that side? Are you supposed to see me or am I supposed to see you? Oh, okay, you can see me, right? Okay, so Alex, from an IATA point of view, do you actually even understand this African continent? Do you understand where our challenges are? Okay, yeah, see to that question. Steve, I saw you wanted to greet me when you got in here. Steve Daly, okay, you're here. So from an OEM point of view, do you actually understand what our challenges are? Do you understand where we need your contribution? Mostly, yeah? And I'm thinking from a fueling point of view, so you guys that sell us fuel, do you understand what our challenges are? Do you understand what we need to do in the next 24 months for us to answer the question that my colleague asked us? Let me help you. So the first thing that we need to do, Alex, is we need to collapse all those financial policies that you as IATA have, the multilateral processes that you guys have that bring a lot of financial challenges for our airlines, so that when they sell whatever services they sell, they should be able to repatriate their money back to their organizations as quickly as possible. Because let me tell you something, from an aviation point of view, Camille, this you must know. If you don't know, go back home. What you must know from an aviation point of view is revenue is vanity. Revenue is vanity. It's just something that you record and report to the board. Profit is sanity. It gives you some kind of sanity in terms of the cost that you're covering. But George, you would know that cash flow is reality. There's no airline that collapses because it has run out of cash. I mean, out of aircraft or pilots. They all collapse because they've run out of cash. So the first thing that we need to do, Vijay, is we need to make sure that the airlines have direct access to their funds as and when they need them. No, there should be no even talk about blocked funds. That's the first thing we need to do. The second thing we do, Steve, so you see, you guys produce airplanes and engines and all kinds of things, and you train our people to operate these things. So, and we do a very good job of operating these airplanes. But what we need to do, Vijay, on the continent, is we need to break down the barriers so that when somebody is trained in one geography, they can actually go to the other geography. And when this guy needs pilots for his 737, and this guy needs pilots for his ATRs, there should be no challenge whatsoever in terms of certification. So we must make sure that we standardize the certification, and we must have acceptance of each other's jurisdiction. The third thing that we must do is also make sure that, and for me this is a big one, we must make sure that we implement what we say we're going to do. So we all have acceptance of the single Africa air transport market. 38 countries have signed up. But it's a dismal performance in terms of even the ones that have signed up, they're not implementing the 8 pillars. Do you know what the 8 pillars are? Yeah, you're ducking now, you see. And yet you say, yeah, we are Africans, we know African aviation. There are 8 pillars of implementation of SAATM, and not all of us are even aware. And we are at a conference for aviation in Africa. Can you imagine? If we were to go out into the street, then it doesn't surprise me that our ministers and our officials don't know, because we ourselves don't know. So we need to start actually understanding what our commitment and responsibilities are as African aviators, so that when we start talking about implementation of SAATM, we don't just focus on one thing and say, no, because there's no freedom traffic rights, so SAATM is not being implemented. No, you're wrong. SAATM has got 8 pillars, and amongst those 8 pillars, one of them is freedom traffic rights. So when we have these 3 things in place, then we can be able to start saying, within the next 24 months, this is what we must do. But I know I've spoken more than 3 minutes. I'll give you back your time. I'll come back and tell you what we must stop doing.
Thank you very much, Aaron. Thank you. But you heard it, ladies and gentlemen. These are 3 specialists on the ground who actually, from a tourist or from the airline, or generally for the African perspective, have lived through decades of discussions and roadmaps and policies on how to improve the African aviation sector. Can I turn now to you? Anyone would like to add to what you heard distinguished panelists mention as each of their 3 action items? Who would like to just raise your hand? There are microphones who will come to you in a flash.
No, don't give this one. No. Give that one there at the back there. Yeah, go to the back there.
George. Oh, who?
He's spoken already.
Yeah, Aaron is my friend, so don't be surprised that he lobbied for me. My name is Dalmas Okendo from Kenya Airways. I think the other thing that we need to do is to take our conversations around airline consolidation beyond lip service to real action. I know that the Secretary General AFRAA did talk about it in the morning. We keep talking very well about the successes of other airline groups, and yet we are not taking concrete steps to consolidate within Africa. And that should be our next frontier of success. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dalmas from Kenya Airways. George.
Briefly.
You're mine, huh? You're mine now. So, in short, definitely Aaron and everyone here is correctly said. But do you think SAATM have a correct implementation if nobody is aware of what are the 8 pillars of it? Facilitation. What facilitation do we have? So we're talking SAATM. Where are we? And when we heard about it lately, we heard that we are almost there. We are, how many years this has been running? And again, I think I spoke about it very, very briefly on my speech because the time was running. We have an issue. We still live in silos. All of us live in silos, regardless of SAATM or not SAATM. We still live on borders, closed borders. Blocked funds, as you correctly said it. Blocked fund. Today, you have an engineer who is working in Kenya. Can he come and work here? Can he use his license to work here? Can I use him? Can we have a single pool of a team working together? I don't know if this question can be answered now. And I remember we sat here 3 years ago. We said the same thing. And Aaron was saying the same thing, fighting with him. Okay? And we had those talks. And what is the result? We're speaking about it today. Can we stop and implement? And how can we do that? That's a question to your esteemed panelists here. Because this cannot work like this. It cannot continue like this. And when we speak about SAF, we spoke about SAF, we spoke about the future, we spoke about all this. Do you think we can achieve 2050? That's a question as well I'd like anybody to answer me. Thank you.
Thank you, George. Kamil.
Hi, thank you very much. You know, so you had started off by saying we want to identify some of the reasons it's fragmented and so on. And you also asked the panelists to come up with what recommendations the panelists believe will reduce this fragmentation and improve aviation on the continent. And that's usually the common thing I've heard in the last 6 years. The issue obviously is that's where the period gets added, and that's the end of it. We all walk away, nothing happens, okay? And to be honest, I felt a little disappointed today when I was doing my speech that I was literally out of energy from repeating the same thing. I think what the objective of this panel should be is then come up with a plan on how to address these issues using the 3 associations in this room with the applicable stakeholders to move something forwards. Because we can't just keep talking about it. And everybody will have, most likely, an accurate point of view, all right? And then what? So I would love the panel to come up with, in the end, okay, these are the action items, and hold the 3 associations responsible to action these items.
You're going to lead to a question, the next question I'm going to put to the panel, but before, there's a gentleman at the back next to Dalmas, who... One here and one here.
Hello, I'm Miriam Hutton from Pivot Consultants out of the U.S. And this is my second conference, and I'm glad to be here, number one. Number two, the low-hanging fruit from what I've seen thus far is that you mentioned in terms of finance, that is a big one. The second one is also in terms of, let's say, MROs not being localized here. So it's very difficult in terms of supply chain for you guys to support your fleet. Most of them you have to send outside of the continent. So that is a big cumbersome or a bottleneck that you guys should address. But from what I just left MRO in Americas, and I told them I was coming over here. And of course, we're like, okay, Miriam, let's be a little realistic. And the huge conundrum that I heard across a lot of OEMs was that finance in terms of with different governments. So you have 54 countries doing it 54 different ways. So if there's a baseline in terms of how you guys can operate, I think that would be more efficient, as well as it would help in terms of more people, more amped to come in to assist.
Thank you very much. Yes, please.
Nice to meet you. My name is Özkan Cengiz. I'm coming from Turkey, and I just established a local company here in Joburg in this visit. And thank you very much for this opportunity, and I see a lot of people contributing. And just as I observed, this is my first attendance to your convention. I think the best way to start is from your young generation, just because when you pull them to some legacy, which everyone is complaining, happening for the past 6 years, I think it's just the best is just starting fresh with the young generation. They are sitting in the university desks and maybe looking for a job, looking for an opportunity. They are fresh, they are not yet contaminated by business challenges. So I started some initiations for that, and I try to make my connections with everyone I can, and I can share more. So I would like to actually explore those opportunities for the young generation, and my humble opinion is just focusing on them and just make a refresh and start with the more connected, because they are more connected than us from our generation, youngs, Gen Z, Gen Y, and I think they can make it if we teach them what we want them to do. So that's my contribution, and thank you very much again.
Thank you very much. Yeah, this is when I wish the choir was still here. We could have asked the young boys and girls what they think about all this. Can I ask then the panelists, and I'll start with Aaron this time. Okay, we kind of all know what needs to be done. I mean, it's in some ways, it's not rocket science. The question has always been, who actually takes the lead? Who becomes accountable for delivering on what we all know needs to be done? And I think that lack of accountability for leadership, for delivering on the various roadmaps we have all signed up to and praised for so long, remains very fuzzy. Which is why we have these sustained conversations on the same issues, with perhaps a few highlights changing over time. But who actually needs to do all that we've identified? Who should be the lead organization? Should it be a collective? Should it be a group of leaders representing different stakeholders who've been tasked to actually come up with an action plan which is measured, which is monitored, which is actually delivering results? Aaron.
So Vijay, the challenge is if we go back and we start saying, maybe let's find an organization or an institution that is going to be accountable, it's almost like going back to committees. You know, a committee is everybody's business, but no one's responsibility. So I think we start first by flipping this script. The obvious result and outcome is very easily measurable from the airlines themselves. So I'm giving the responsibility to the airlines to do the best that they have with what they have. When they start delivering, it's easier for them to go back to their stakeholders and ask for more. So they can't go and say, no, we can't do this because there's no SAATM, there's no this. No. The route rights that you currently have you utilized all of them? Because they are there in writing. And when we go to the authorities, we actually get to see that these airlines have been granted traffic rights that they are not using. So they can't talk about SAATM. The traffic rights that they currently have, they are not using them. So why do you want even to talk about SAATM? It's a scapegoat. That's the first thing. The second thing is, I think we already have the institutions established many years ago. George has run away because I was going to answer him about this SAATM story that he's trying to tell me about. The reason why people like George talk about SAATM not being implemented.
He's coming back.
The reason why he talks about SAATM not being implemented is because he has lost focus. You see, the focus should be, George, you as an airline, what exactly do you need to achieve irrespective of the nonsense that is happening out elsewhere there? Make that happen. Approach an airline, Uganda Airlines, for example, and work with them, just the two of you. I can tell you that your officials will come and start asking you how they can help you. But the more you start talking about SAATM and traffic rights and how many years, come on, George, SAATM is only 8 years old, for your own information. Yeah. And SAATM, by the way, is just an instrument that was put in place for us to actually activate and make sure that we implement the Yamoussoukro decision of 1998, which was put in place for us to further the requirement of the Yamoussoukro Declaration of 1988. Now, 1988, George, let me tell you something. The EU had not even thought about the Single Europe Act, and you are telling me that Africans can't do anything. The second thing that we need to do is make sure that these people that we give positions actually believe in Africa. They have to believe in Africa. When they start believing in Africa, we start getting things done. When they don't believe in Africa, they quickly run away to Europe or the Middle East and bring us hybrid solutions that don't work for us.
Thank you. George.
No, thank you. So there's a gentleman that spoke about consolidations. And I think it's one of the key things that needs to be done by ourselves as airlines. As Aaron speaks about the unutilized traffic rights that a lot of airlines have and have access to, or those that have not been awarded. We can think about South Africa as it is, that we do have some of those traffic rights that have not even been awarded, but we still have challenges in some airlines accessing those traffic rights. And I think maybe the best way to have a look at this is that before we can even think about SAATM, as Aaron said, the correct thing is to look at the current asset base we have from a traffic rights point of view. How best do we utilize that? What do? We're waiting for the big boys coming from the Gulf, and what they do, they're looking at, board room participation at a strategic level. They don't look at superficial type, arrangement between ourselves that we do, code sharing, and so on and so on. But they're looking at stakeholder participation, shareholder participation, where they have an influence in terms of strategic direction of some of those areas. We can speak about, I'm looking at my colleague there, Dr. Namta. I won't call your surname Dr. Namta. I know you're looking at that. The Qatar, Airlink, equity participation. So we need to look at that from a South African point of view. And one of the things that we should probably look at is exactly what Ethiopian Airlines is doing in terms of its own growth ambitions. So we need to have those kind of consolidations that would enable us, without the open sky that is taking time because governments are protecting, some of their spaces and all that. Let's use this as airlines ourselves so that we can have a broad participation as opposed to be competing with each other, even where there's no need to compete with each other, but giving us some access to boardroom strategic participation.
Excellent. And Rowan, sitting from a tourism sector's perspective and looking at, you obviously need the aviation sector to actually step up to be able to deliver on your own mandate. How are you seeing that interaction, the tourism sector with the aviation sector, and what would you want the aviation sector to do to help more?
So Vijay, I think for me, tourism feels like the biggest cheerleader of the aviation sector. And the reason I say that is without your success, we cannot succeed as tourism. I know how much a traveler is worth to the South African economy from different parts of the world. And let me tell you, an African traveler competes with a US and a European traveler. And I would like to urge everyone in the room to actually be brave and reduce our dependency on the rest of the world. We've seen in COVID that when we struggled in South Africa with movement, we depended on domestic tourism. Then we were encouraging our colleagues from the rest of Africa and our friends and family to be traveling to South Africa. And essentially reducing that dependency on needing airlines to be flying from hubs outside of the continent. And I'd really like to encourage everyone in the room to please make that a norm. I'm a bit jaded myself about thinking about a crisis and how we must have this conversation again. Let's just do it. SAATM or no SAATM, we have business to do.
Okay, thank you very much. I can tell you, actually, one of the biggest cheerleaders for tourism is aviation. It's two sides of the same coin. We need each other. So I think working together makes sense. From that discussion, and I'm going to give George the mic now. Yeah.
Just respond to what is here. SAATM is very important for airlines. Why? Because it seems like we are sitting on a panels, and those panels have blurred our minds a bit. Because we keep saying, yes, it's working. But what is SAATM for an airline? Why? SAATM increases passenger flows, increases connectivity, supports a fifth freedom in some countries where you already have either co-chairs or working together, working groups, and you cannot still do the fifth freedom. You are unable to exercise the fifth freedom. While, as you said correctly, the Gulf or from somewhere, they come over and they do a fifth freedom, but intercontinental connectivity and is still in silos, fragmentation. And that's the cause of SAATM. So we started the roots from, as you said, 1980s in Africa, but we're still not there. My issue is implementation. My issue is not to walk over a blurred vision or a hypothetical outcome. We need to have it for real. And I don't want to name airlines or countries by name, but reality speaking, you can do point to point as per bilateral. When you come and do a fifth freedom, so you can do more, some of the countries you are unable within Africa. And that's why we need a support. And this support comes from the airline, yes, itself, and I agree with Aaron, that's the only thing I agree with him. But, but at the same time, it needs also a support from the AU and a support from the governments individually and independently. And that's why I came up with, said, we need an alliance. We need to put hands together as airlines, not only as countries. That's where it comes AFRAA, and it comes a bigger alliance behind that. Thank you.
Thank you, George.
And don't let Aaron answer.
What I think, see, if you look at it in terms of business strategies around the world, no business has thrived by waiting for governments to give them permission to do business. Never worked. Businesses thrive when they take the lead, and many of times governments follow. Why should aviation be different? Why shouldn't the aviation industry take the lead and decide its own future in terms of what it needs to do, first at a national level, working with the national stakeholders to actually have the ability and the support and the partnerships to be able to actually operate viably. If each African state had their own national aviation stakeholders working on a national plan to ensure that their own national aviation sector, tourism sector, is starting to grow, starting to make meaningful impact. And that would include operating wherever it is viable to do so. If governments could then be involved in that process and say, okay, you have now an action plan, what can we do to support you? How do we get out of the way of your action plan? And how do we ensure that we support your action plan? Small, low-hanging fruits, block funds, for example. How do governments make sure that your own money as an airline is actually delivered to you in real time rather than waiting for a depreciated amount that, years down the road? So I think in terms of facilitation, how do the tourism sector help governments change the rules so that it becomes easier for people to travel within Africa rather than getting it increasingly complicated? So is that something, I'm going to put my good friend Abdul Rahman on the spot here, is that something which AFRAA could take the lead on? i.e., saying, guys, we know where we are. It's not a happy spot. We know the potential is great, but we cannot rely on either outsiders or governments or the continental governance to drive this. We as an industry, we must drive this. Because who knows better, if the microphone could come to the SG, who knows this industry better than those who actually have made their lives building it?
Thank you. I want to follow my chairman to say that for me, SAATM is very important. Why? It's about traffic rights. Of course, we can have a portfolio of traffic rights, but some of them are not good business for you. So you will not operate them.
True.
The problem we have, when you want to do business, you need to have access to market. If you don't have access to market, there is no business. That's the problem. And
but
what
you can start business with the areas you have access to.
Yeah.
As you work for having additional access. Yes. See, what I'm saying is, if a government, an airline comes to a government having really broken down, it gets little attention.
Yes.
But if you're able to show, okay, we're starting, whether it's a domestic flights, you're building up a plan where you're showing that you have growth, you're going to be viable, you're going to be going to government for funds, you're going to be giving funds to government.
Yes, I'm not talking about domestic. I'm talking about regional and international flights.
I'm talking about an airline being efficient and viable.
Okay.
It may start with being domestic.
Yes, of course.
It may start being with cargo. It doesn't necessarily have to be intercontinental or even across the continent.
Sorry, I want to go further in my idea. The problem you have, if the trunk routes, where you have good traffic, that is where we have a problem with SAATM implementation. Because sometimes governments are even not giving you the third and fourth freedom traffic rights. They are limiting you. And I'm not even talking about fifth freedom. That's where maybe we are not talking about it yet. This is the slots to operate on an airport. When I was CEO, I faced this kind of problem. Okay. Avoiding you to come to an airport at the time you want to come, just to block you. That's the problem. So the question the chairman has asked about alliance, well, it's important. When you create an alliance, you want to create hubs across the continent and to create corridors of traffic. So it's simple. If one airline, one state want to support having a hub in your country, you need to create the condition, the environment to support that hub. It means traffic rights. It means reducing tax and charges at your level. So that's what I wanted just to say about it. You know, it's a very complex situation. It's not because you put a highway traffic right between two cities, two villages, that you will have traffic between on this highway. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gigi. And the point, ladies and gentlemen, I want to emphasize, we have run out of time. And not just for the subject matter of trying to get African aviation to grow, but in terms of our session as well. So let me just please ask you to join me to thank our distinguished panelists and all of you who've contributed during this session with a round of applause. And leave you with just a couple of thoughts so that we can continue the discussion beyond this session throughout the convention and beyond. This is a defining moment for African aviation. And it behoves African governments and other stakeholders to embrace and be seen to embrace aviation as a formidable catalyst for economic integration, tourism growth, trade facilitation, employment, social impact, and continental development. They must act accordingly, because African aviation cannot realize its potential as the next global aviation frontier as long as the ecosystem remains fragmented across regulation, infrastructure, connectivity, human resources, tourism strategies, and trade implementation. We've highlighted a few areas where active collaboration, cooperation, harmonization, whether in terms of operations, whether in terms of training, whether in terms of safety and security oversight, whether in terms of supply chain, especially in terms of jet fuel. How do we actually leverage the fact that we have oil producers on our continent? How can that help basically with not only our jet fuel supply, but also our commitments for green energy? These are things which we need to focus on. And I think all of us must work together and accept that for a safe, secure, sustainable, viable, and inclusive African aviation, it requires insightful policies and effective actions driven by competent leaders with integrity. I repeat that, competent leaders with integrity. For African aviation to survive and thrive, and for our beloved continent and fellow Africans to proudly fly high. Asante sana, merci beaucoup, thank you very much.